The farmhouse looked warm enough to break a heart. Its porch light glowed against the late evening cold, soft and yellow behind the drifting mist, spilling across the white railings and the front steps where muddy boot prints had already begun to dry. Smoke curled from the chimney. A lamp burned in the kitchen. From the road, Hollow Creek Farm still looked like the kind of place where supper waited on the stove and someone old was safe inside. But Samuel and Ruth Whitaker were standing outside the gate. They had 2 suitcases between them, one army blanket folded over a broken lawn chair, and a plastic grocery bag filled with medicine bottles. Samuel's coat was buttoned wrong, probably because his fingers had gone stiff in the cold. Ruth kept one hand tucked through his arm while the other held a dented tin box against her chest. She held it tighter than a purse, tighter than food, tighter than anything that looked useful to survive the night. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this are about the forgotten people, the loyal ones who still remember, and the truth that waits for someone brave enough to uncover it. A fresh eviction notice had been nailed to the wooden gate. The paper was too white for that old fence, too clean for that tired farm. It carried the county seal at the bottom and enough legal language to make cruelty sound organized. The property had been transferred. The occupants had failed to comply. Forced removal could proceed without further notice. Samuel read it once, then stopped looking at it. A man could only be humiliated so many times by the same piece of paper. He was 78. Tall, in the way old farmers remain tall, even after life bends them. His back had a permanent curve now, but his chin stayed lifted. He did not beg the men on the porch. He did not shout at the black SUV parked near the barn. He simply stood beside the gate, one hand braced on the post, as if his body was the last lock left on the land. Ruth was smaller, wrapped in a brown coat with a missing button near the collar. The wind worried at her gray hair and pulled loose strands across her face. Every time she tried to tuck them back, the tin box shifted, and she pulled it close again. The box was old, the kind that might once have held sewing thread or Christmas cookies. Around it was tied a faded strip of green military cloth. 3 stitched letters showed through years of wear. E.W. Inside the yard, 2 men in clean jackets moved around the porch with clipboards. One took pictures of the windows. Another measured the front steps. They treated the house like an empty structure, even though the people who had kept it alive for 30 years were breathing in the cold only a few yards away. Victor Harlan stood near the porch rail, speaking into his phone with the calm voice of a man who had never been forced out of anything. He was a county attorney, polished, careful, and polite in the way dangerous men sometimes are. He never raised his voice at Samuel or Ruth. He did not need to. The locks had already been changed that morning. The paperwork had already done what shouting could not. When Ruth asked if she could go inside for Samuel's heart pills, Victor told her the matter had moved beyond personal arrangements. He said it gently, almost kindly. That made it worse. Samuel looked past him, past the porch, past the barn, toward the backfield where an old cedar tree leaned beside the fence line. His eyes kept returning to that tree. Each glance carried the same warning: do not touch that ground. One of Victor's men noticed. He gave a small laugh and said the old man had been talking about buried maps again. Victor turned away from his phone long enough to smile. That's why this had to happen, he said. They're not capable of making sound decisions anymore. Ruth's face tightened, but she did not answer. She had heard those words too many times. Confused, unstable, forgetful. Words used by people who wanted her silence to look like proof. Samuel's hand slipped from the fence post. Ruth reached for him, and the tin box slid from under her arm. It struck the mud with a dull metal sound. The latch popped open. A rusted key fell out first. Then a folded letter tied with string, a cracked strip of leather, a small photograph, yellowed at the edges, landed face down beneath the porch light. Ruth bent for it too quickly and nearly lost her balance. Samuel whispered her name, frightened for the first time that evening. The wind flipped the photograph just enough to reveal the writing on the back. "Keep the map safe until my son comes home." Below the sentence was a signature. Elias Ward. Ruth snatched the photograph and pushed it back into the box. But Victor had already seen enough. His polite expression thinned. For the first time that night, the county attorney looked toward the cedar tree. Then headlights appeared on the county road. An old pickup slowed at the bend and rolled toward the gate. Its engine rumbled low in the cold. The truck stopped beside the ditch, and the driver's door opened. A man stepped down in a faded marine field jacket. Beside him, an aging German shepherd dropped quietly to the gravel. The dog's muzzle was silver, his body lean, his movements controlled. He did not bark at Victor. He did not sniff the suitcases. He stood beside the Marine, ears forward, eyes locked on the backfield. The old K9 was staring straight at the cedar tree. The man who stepped out of the pickup did not rush toward the gate. He stood for a moment in the cold with one hand still on the door, studying Hollow Creek Farm the way a Marine studies a room before entering it. His eyes moved from the eviction notice to the suitcases, from the men on the porch to the old couple in the mud, then past all of them to the cedar tree at the far edge of the field. Caleb Ward had not come home to save anyone. He had come back to sign papers. The faded marine field jacket on his shoulders had belonged to his father, Elias Ward. Caleb had almost left it in a storage box that morning. But the weather had turned hard, and old habits had pulled him toward the coat without thinking. It still carried the smell of canvas, rain, and something faintly metallic from years of being stored with tools. The sleeves were a little short on him. The left cuff had been repaired with darker thread. Caleb had never liked wearing it, but he wore it anyway, as if grief sometimes dressed a man before he understood why. Beside him, Ranger stepped down from the truck with quiet control. The German shepherd was old enough for gray to show along his muzzle, but age had not softened his discipline. His paws landed without hurry. His head stayed level. He did not bark at the strangers, did not pull toward the house, did not search for attention. He took his place near Caleb's left leg, like a shadow that had learned obedience in places far more dangerous than a county road. Victor Harlan came down from the porch with a folder under one arm. His smile returned before he reached the gate. "Mr. Ward," he said, smooth and measured. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." Caleb looked at him, then at the notice nailed to the fence. "Looks like I'm late." Victor gave a small, practiced laugh. "Not late, just in time to finalize things cleanly. The transfer is almost complete. We're documenting the property before closing." Samuel made a sound in his throat. Not quite a laugh, not quite a cough. Ruth touched his wrist, asking him without words to hold his anger a little longer. Caleb noticed the touch. He noticed the way Samuel's knees trembled, but his spine stayed straight. He noticed the grocery bag of medicine, the army blanket, the mud on Ruth's shoes, and the tin box locked again against her chest. "You two have somewhere to sleep tonight?" Caleb asked. Samuel looked at the farmhouse. The kitchen light glowed behind lace curtains. Ruth had probably washed by hand for years. "We did this morning," he said. Victor stepped in before the words could settle. The county offered them temporary placement. Transportation was arranged. Mr. Whitaker refused assistance and became agitated. Ruth's eyes lifted. He asked to get his pills. Victor turned to her with patient sadness, the kind that made cruelty look responsible. "Mrs. Whitaker, we've been through this. No one is denying you medical care, but the property is no longer under your control." Caleb's face did not change, but his hand tightened once on Ranger's lead. He had heard that tone before. Men used it in briefings when bad decisions needed clean language. Collateral damage, procedural delay, unavoidable loss. Words built to keep the people saying them from feeling the weight of what they meant. Still, Caleb did not step in. Not fully. He had promised himself on the drive in that he would handle the estate, sign what had to be signed, and leave Hollow Creek before the memories found their way under his skin. The town had already taken enough from him. His father's name had died here before his body ever went into the ground. For 15 years, people had spoken of Elias Ward with lowered voices, as if saying the name too clearly might bring back shame. Victor opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. "Your father left several unresolved matters. This sale finally closes that chapter. I know this place carries history, but history can become a burden if people refuse to move on." Caleb looked toward the cedar tree again. Ranger was still staring at it. "Ranger," Caleb said quietly. "Heel." The dog's ears twitched. He stayed where he was. A thin silence spread between the gate and the porch. Caleb turned his head slowly toward the K9. Ranger had obeyed him through gunfire, airports, hospital corridors, and nightmares that woke Caleb with sweat on his back. The dog did not ignore commands because of a rabbit in the brush or a smell in the mud. Victor tried to smooth over the moment. Old farm, plenty of sense. Animals get restless. Caleb did not answer. Ruth's tin box shifted in her arms. Through the bent lid, a strip of cracked leather showed for just a second. Ranger's body changed before anyone else understood why. His shoulders squared. His nose lowered slightly. His attention moved from the cedar tree to the box. Samuel saw it and went pale. He whispered a command so softly that the wind almost carried it away. "Hold line." Ranger sat perfectly, chest forward, paws set, eyes up. Not a tired dog resting in the cold, but a trained K9 answering a command buried deep in memory. Caleb felt the night narrow around him. His father had used that command. Not in public. Not around neighbors. Elias Ward had used it when Caleb was a boy hiding at the top of the stairs. Watching his father work with military dogs in the yard before dawn, Caleb turned to Samuel. "Where did you learn that?" Ruth pulled the tin box closer, fear and hope crossing her face at the same time. Samuel looked past Caleb to Victor, then back to the old K9, sitting in the mud like a soldier who had recognized a flag. "Your father," Samuel said. "He told us if a ward ever came back with a dog that understood that command, we were supposed to show him the map." Victor's smile vanished. Caleb looked at Ranger. The dog rose without being told and took one slow step toward the field. This time, Caleb followed. Ranger moved toward the field with the leash stretched tight. But Caleb no longer pulled him back. The old German shepherd kept his nose low, following a line no human eye could see. His paws pressed into the wet grass beyond the gate, leaving dark prints in the frost. Every few steps, he paused, lifted his head toward the wind, then turned again toward the cedar tree behind the farmhouse. He moved like a dog returning to a place he had never been, guided by something older than memory. Caleb followed in silence. Behind him, Samuel and Ruth came slowly through the open gate. Ruth held the tin box against her chest with both arms. Samuel kept one hand near her elbow, though his eyes never left Ranger. The old man looked shaken. But for the first time that evening, there was something more than fear in his face. There was recognition. There was the terrible relief of seeing someone else believe what he had carried alone for years. Victor Harlan walked after them with two men from the porch. His shoes sank into the mud, and his polished calm began to show cracks. "Mr. Ward," Victor called, his voice sharper now. "I strongly advise you not to disturb that area. This property is under active transfer review." Caleb did not stop. "You said the transfer was almost complete." "That's correct." "Then a dog walking across a field shouldn't bother you." Victor's mouth tightened. Ranger reached the cedar tree and circled it once. The tree was old, half bent by weather, its roots pushing through the dirt like thick knuckles. On the south side, where the ground dipped slightly toward the creek, Ranger froze. His ears angled forward. His nose touched the soil. Then he scraped the ground with one paw. Ruth made a small sound. Samuel stepped forward. "That's where he marked it." Caleb turned. "Who?" Samuel swallowed hard. "For years." That question had only led to laughter, warnings, and reports about his mental state. Answering it now seemed to cost him more than standing in the cold. "Your father," he said. "Elias." Victor gave a short, humorless laugh. "There it is again. Mr. Ward. This is what I meant. They've built an entire fantasy around your father's name." Ranger lifted his head and looked at Victor. The field went quiet. The dog did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply stepped away from the tree and placed himself between Victor and the old couple. His body was still, his head level, his eyes fixed on the attorney with the kind of patience that made every man nearby reconsider his next movement. Caleb looked at Ranger, then at Victor. "Stay back." Victor's face hardened. "Are you giving me an order?" "No." Caleb said. "He is." One of the men from the porch reached for his phone. Caleb noticed, but said nothing. His attention had shifted to the tree, to the soil Ranger had scratched, and to the way Samuel stared at that patch of ground as though it might open into the past. Ruth slowly lowered herself to one knee and set the tin box in the mud. Her hands trembled as she worked the latch. This time she did not hide what was inside. She took out the cracked strip of leather Ranger had smelled earlier and held it toward Caleb. "This was on the dog your father brought here," she said. "The night he came, it was raining hard. He had blood on his sleeve. The dog was limping. Samuel wanted to call the sheriff, but Elias told us the sheriff's office was already compromised." Caleb took the leather. Faded numbers had been stamped into it. Most were worn away, but enough remained for his face to change. It was a military K9 collar mark. Ranger edged closer and sniffed the leather, then turned back to the cedar tree with sudden focus. Caleb crouched beside the place he had scratched. The soil was packed harder than the surrounding mud. Someone had buried something there with care and covered it well. Samuel's voice dropped. Elias said nobody was to dig unless a ward came back. Caleb looked up at him. "Why?" "Because he didn't trust anyone else to live long enough with it." That sentence hung in the field. Caleb began digging with his hands. Victor moved forward at once. "This is destruction of property." Samuel stepped into his path. The old man was thin, unsteady, and breathing hard. But he did not move aside. "You had 30 years to call me crazy," Samuel said. "Let him have 30 seconds. Ranger returned to the hole and dug beside Caleb. Mud flew across the roots. The cold earth came loose in heavy clumps. Caleb's fingers struck stone once, then roots. Then something metallic beneath them. A dull scrape sounded under Ranger's paw. Caleb cleared the soil away and found a narrow, rusted tube wrapped in blackened oilcloth. It had been sealed with wire and wax, buried deep under the cedar roots where no casual surveyor would look. Ranger sat back immediately, chest rising, eyes on the tube as if his job had changed from finding it to guarding it. Caleb broke the wire with his knife. The tube opened with a dry crack. Inside was a folded sheet of thick paper, a broken half of a dog tag, and a small note sealed in yellowed plastic. Caleb opened the note first. The handwriting was old, but he knew it before he finished reading. If Caleb finds this, don't trust the county record. Below the sentence was the signature his childhood had been running from. Elias Ward. Caleb unfolded the larger sheet. A hand-drawn map spread across his hands, marked with property lines, field paths, creek beds, and 7 red circles across the valley. Hollow Creek Farm sat at the center. But it was not the only place marked. Ruth whispered behind him. He said this farm was only the beginning. Victor said nothing. For the first time that night, fear showed clearly on his face. And if you believe Ranger just uncovered more than an old map, leave a comment, share this story, and subscribe before the next part, because what Caleb finds written on that map is about to turn one eviction into a county-wide scandal. Caleb spread the map across the hood of his pickup and pinned the corners down with both hands before the wind could take it. The paper was old, thick, and stained from years inside the metal tube. But the ink had survived. Under the beam of Caleb's flashlight, the lines came alive with a precision that did not belong to an ordinary farmer. The creek was marked by depth. The fence lines were measured by distance. The cedar tree had been circled twice. Hollow Creek Farm sat in the center, drawn with steady black ink. But around it were 7 red circles scattered across the valley like wounds no one had bothered to close. Samuel stood near the front bumper, breathing hard from the walk. Ruth kept close to him, the tin box pressed against her ribs. Victor remained a few yards away, silent now, watching Caleb study the map with the fixed attention of a Marine reading terrain before a mission. Caleb traced one red line with his finger. It ran from the cedar tree to the creek access road, then cut south toward a strip of high ground behind the barn. On the county transfer papers, that same strip had been absorbed into the development company's land. The farmhouse itself was never the true prize. The valuable piece was the hidden access route, the water line, and the future highway survey path running along the edge of the property. Caleb looked up. This transfer moved the boundary. Victor's answer came too quickly. Old maps are often inaccurate. This one isn't old in the way you want it to be. Ruth slowly opened the tin box and removed the folded letter tied with string. Her hands trembled. But she did not hand it to Victor. She gave it to Caleb. "Your father wrote that the night he came here," she said. Caleb untied the string with care. The letter smelled faintly of paper, oil, and age. Elias Ward's handwriting filled the page. Tight and controlled, it named 3 farms that had already been taken. 2 widows declared incompetent within days of refusing to sell, and 1 veteran whose land transfer had been signed while he was lying unconscious in a hospital bed. Caleb read without moving. Each sentence pulled his father out of the grave and placed him back into the world as a man with a mission. Not a disgrace. Ruth's voice stayed low. He came in the rain. Samuel found him near the barn, bleeding from the shoulder. There was a K9 with him. Big dog. Hort leg. Elias said he had found records in the county archive. But someone already knew. Samuel looked toward the road as if the past might still be watching from the dark. He told us the sheriff's office couldn't be trusted. Said if anything happened to him, the map would show where to start. Caleb glanced at the broken dog tag in his palm. Mud still clung to one edge. Only half the name was visible. Bell. A patrol car turned into the driveway before anyone could speak again. Its lights stayed off, but the engine cut near the gate. A young deputy stepped out, one hand near her belt, her face alert. Victor's shoulders loosened slightly when he saw the uniform. "Deputy Bell," he called. "Good. We need this scene controlled." The deputy approached with caution. Her nameplate read, Nora Bell. She looked at Victor first, then at Samuel and Ruth, then at Caleb's muddy hands and the map on the truck hood. "What happened here?" she asked. Victor began giving her the clean version. Trespass, disturbance, elderly confusion, an unauthorized dig on disputed property. Caleb waited until Victor finished. Then he held up the broken dog tag. Nora's expression changed before she touched it. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "Under the cedar tree?" Caleb said, "With this map, my father buried it." Nora took the tag carefully, using a handkerchief from her pocket. The moment she wiped away the dirt, her breath caught. The partial name was enough. Her father had been Deputy Thomas Bell, the man who died in a hunting accident years after quietly questioning missing land records. Nora had been told he had grown paranoid near the end. She had been told grief made her remember his concerns as more important than they were. Caleb placed the county transfer beside Elias's map. "This document lists Martha Bell as a witness." Nora looked down. "Martha Bell was my mother," she said. Victor stepped forward. "Deputy, this is exactly why you should recuse yourself from. She died 3 months before this date," Nora said. The field went still. Caleb turned the document toward the flashlight. The stamp looked official, but now the paper seemed less powerful. Nora pulled out her phone and began recording, stating the date, location, names present, and the discovery of potential evidence tied to a forged land transfer. Victor objected, but she kept recording. Caleb pointed to the seal at the bottom of the eviction packet. "When did the county start using this version?" Nora studied it. Her face hardened. "After the courthouse renovation, 8 years ago. The document is dated 15 years ago." Samuel closed his eyes. Ruth covered her mouth with one hand. For 3 decades, they had been called confused by people standing behind impossible paperwork. Ranger suddenly lifted his head. Until that moment, he had remained beside Ruth, quiet and watchful. Now his ears turned toward the barn. He crossed the yard without command, moving past the porch steps, past the black SUV, toward the old stable wall behind the hay room. Caleb followed with the flashlight. Nora came after him. Still recording, Samuel whispered that Elias had drawn another mark on the map, something he never understood. Caleb looked again, near the barn, beneath a small triangle. His father had written 2 words in red ink, "Second witness." Ranger stopped at a plank nailed over older wood and pressed his nose to the seam. Victor's polished calm finally cracked. He reached for his phone and said the sheriff needed to come immediately. Caleb looked at the covered wall, then at Nora's father's broken dog tag in her hand. The map had not given them the truth yet. It had only shown them where the next body of evidence was buried. Sheriff Darnell Price arrived with 2 county vehicles and enough flashing red and blue light to make the old barn look like a crime scene before anyone had even touched the wall. Victor Harlan met him halfway across the yard, speaking fast in a low voice, one hand gripping his phone, the other pointing toward Caleb, Nora, and the plank Ranger had found. The sheriff listened without looking at the map. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Price did not ask where the evidence came from. He did not ask why a dead woman's name appeared on a witness line. He looked at Victor first, then at Samuel and Ruth, as if the old couple were the problem, standing in the way of a clean evening. Nora kept her phone recording. She stood near the barn entrance with Thomas Bell's broken dog tag folded in her handkerchief and Elias Ward's map visible on the hood of Caleb's truck behind her. Her voice stayed steady as she documented the sheriff's arrival, the condition of the scene, and the fact that potential evidence had been discovered before county law enforcement took control. Sheriff Price heard her and frowned. "Deputy Bell," he said, "turn that off." Nora did not lower the phone. "Given the names on these documents, sir, I think the record needs to stay open." Victor stepped beside the sheriff. "This is exactly what I was concerned about. She has a personal connection now. Mr. Ward is emotionally compromised. The Whitakers have a long history of unstable claims, and that dog has already disturbed the property." Ruth's face tightened at the word unstable. Samuel looked down at the mud on his boots, and for a moment, the old strength in his shoulders seemed to give way. That word had followed them for years. It had been written into reports, repeated in offices, whispered by neighbors who found it easier to doubt two poor old people than to question men with titles. Caleb saw the effect it had on them. He stepped closer to Samuel and Ruth. Not dramatically, just enough to stand in the same line with them. Ranger moved with him and sat in front of the couple. Facing the sheriff and Victor, the old K9's posture was calm, controlled, and unmistakably protective. He made no sound. But the space around Ruth changed. For the first time that night, no one reached for her box. Sheriff Price pointed toward the plank. "Nobody opens that wall until I decide what this is." Caleb looked at Nora. "You still recording, yes?" "Good." Victor's voice sharpened. "You are not in command here." "Mr. Ward." Caleb turned to him. "No, but your paperwork says Martha Bell witnessed a transfer 3 months after she died. Your seal is dated 7 years before that version existed. Your boundary line moves straight across the water access, my father circled in red. And your first instinct was to take the map." The neighbors gathered near the gate had gone quiet. A few had drifted closer after the patrol cars arrived. Old farmers, widows, men in work jackets, women with folded arms against the cold. They had come for spectacle, but now some of them were staring at the red marks on Elias Ward's map with recognition they did not want to feel. An elderly man near the fence spoke first. His voice was rough. "My brother's place had a line moved near the creek." Victor turned toward him. "This is not a public meeting." A woman beside him said, "My mother was declared incompetent 2 weeks after she refused to sell." The sheriff snapped, "Everyone stay back." But the damage had started. The lie was no longer sitting alone in a folder. It was spreading across faces. Ranger rose and placed one paw against the plank. The sound was small, a dull tap of claw on old wood. But it pulled every eye back to the barn. Nora moved closer and framed the wall with her phone camera. For the record, the K9 has indicated a specific concealed area matching the second witness mark on the map. The plank appears newer than surrounding boards. Nails show less oxidation. Sheriff Price stepped toward her. "Deputy, that is enough." Nora finally looked directly at him. "My father's dog tag was under that tree." Price stopped. Only for half a second. But Caleb caught it. So did Victor. Caleb took a pry bar from Samuel's tool shelf. He did not swing it or rush. He placed it against the edge of the plank and looked to Nora. "Record the removal." Nora nodded. The first nail came out with a long groan. Dust fell from the seam. The second nail snapped. The third pulled free, and the plank loosened enough for Caleb to lift it away. Behind it was a narrow hollow lined with old oilcloth. Ranger sat immediately, eyes fixed on the opening. Caleb reached inside and drew out an old coffee can wrapped in canvas. Across the canvas was a strip of tape, yellowed with age. Elias Ward's handwriting marked it clearly. Bell has the photographs. Follow the map. Nora's breathing changed. Caleb set the can on a clean feed sack before opening it. Nora filmed every movement. Inside were a small notebook, a sealed envelope of old photographs, and a folded statement signed by Deputy Thomas Bell. Victor's face lost color. Sheriff Price moved fast. That evidence comes with me. Nora stepped between him and the feed sack. Her hand did not touch her weapon. She only held up her phone, still recording, and said, "No, sir. This is now evidence involving your own prior report on Elias Ward's death. State investigators can take custody." For the first time, Sheriff Price had no clean answer ready. Caleb opened the notebook. Page after page listed names, parcel numbers, payment initials, forged witnesses, and quiet transfers stretching back decades. Hollow Creek was only one entry in a much larger theft. The last page carried a note from Elias. "The man helping Harlan is someone my son trusts. If I die, they will make Caleb hate my name so he never comes back." Caleb stared at the sentence until the barn seemed to disappear around him. Victor tried to step away. Ranger stood. No growl came from the dog. But Victor stopped as if a locked gate had appeared in front of him. Caleb lifted the sealed envelope of photographs and looked toward the farmhouse, where the kitchen light still burned behind Ruth's curtains. Whatever Elias and Thomas Bell had seen, whatever had destroyed both their names, the final proof was no longer buried under a tree or hidden behind barnwood. It was about to walk back into the house Samuel and Ruth had been forced to leave. Caleb carried the sealed envelope of photographs back to the farmhouse with both hands, as if the paper inside weighed more than the whole property. No one spoke during the walk from the barn. The cold had settled deeper across Hollow Creek Farm. But the kitchen light still burned behind Ruth's curtains, soft and stubborn against the dark. For years, that light had meant home. That night, it had become evidence of what had been stolen. The house had not been abandoned. It had not been neglected. It had been kept alive by two old people who were punished for remembering the truth. Ruth stopped at the front steps. The lock on the door was new, bright brass, clean edges, no scratches yet. It looked almost insulting against the old wood Samuel had repaired with his own hands. Caleb saw Ruth looking at it and understood. A stranger had changed the lock, but the worn place on the doorframe still carried the shape of her hand. Nora stepped forward and opened the door with the temporary key Victor's men had left hanging inside the lockbox. She kept her phone recording, her voice quiet but clear as she stated the time, the location, and every person entering the farmhouse kitchen. Sheriff Price stood behind them, stiff and silent, no longer giving orders. Victor Harlan remained near the porch, watched by Ranger, who had positioned himself between the lawyer and the old couple without needing a command. Samuel entered first, though his legs were unsteady. Ruth followed, one hand on his arm and the other still holding the tin box. The kitchen looked exactly like a life interrupted. A blue kettle sat on the stove. 2 mugs rested beside the sink. A loaf of bread had been left under a towel. On the table, beside Victor's transfer documents, one of the company men had placed a measuring tape. Caleb removed it and set it aside. Then he laid out the evidence. The county transfer. The eviction notice. Elias Ward's map. The broken dog tag bearing Thomas Bell's name. The letter from Ruth's tin box. The notebook from the barn. Thomas Bell's signed statement. Last came the envelope of photographs. Still sealed after all those years. Nora put on gloves from her patrol kit before opening it. She did not hand the photographs around. She placed them one by one on the table while the camera recorded them. The first photo showed the county archive room late at night. Victor Harlan was younger, but unmistakable, standing near open file boxes with a man from the development company. The second showed Deputy Thomas Bell outside the courthouse, passing a folder to Elias Ward. The third showed Sheriff Price, years younger and still wearing a deputy's badge, accepting an envelope from Victor beside a parked cruiser. Ruth gripped the back of a chair. Samuel stared at the photographs without blinking. The fourth photo silenced the room. It showed Elias Ward near the old bridge 2 nights before his death. He was not drunk. He was not stumbling. He was standing beside his truck, alert, one hand on a folder, while another man faced him in the headlights. Caleb recognized that man immediately. Martin Graves. For 15 years, Martin had been the family friend who explained everything after the funeral. He had told Caleb that grief and war had broken Elias. He had said Caleb's father had become paranoid, that he drank, that he had driven too fast in a storm because he could not live with himself anymore. Martin had put a hand on Caleb's shoulder beside the grave and told him the kindest thing a son could do was let the dead rest. Now his face sat in the photograph beside the men who had stolen the land. Caleb did not shout. His anger settled into something colder and more controlled. He looked at the photo, then at the map, then at the transfer papers that had built a lie around his father's grave. Nora read Thomas Bell's statement aloud. Her father had written that Elias discovered a network of forged land transfers targeting widows, elderly couples, and veterans with no money for court. He had written that records were being removed from the county archive and replaced with altered copies. He had named Victor Harlan, Deputy Price, and Martin Graves as men connected to the cover-up. At the end, Thomas Bell had added one final line: "If Elias Ward dies before this reaches the state, his death must not be treated as an accident." Sheriff Price lowered his eyes. Victor tried to speak from the doorway, but Nora cut him off. She informed him the evidence would be turned over to state investigators outside county control. She also stated, on record, that the sheriff had a direct conflict of interest in both the land transfer and Elias Ward's death report. By morning, the eviction order would be suspended. The transfer would be frozen. The county archive would be locked down. Every red mark on Elias's map would become part of a state investigation. Victor Harlan would no longer be the man explaining the paperwork. He would be the man inside it. But the first justice came quietly. Nora removed the new lock from the door. Samuel sat at his own kitchen table. Ruth set the tin box beside him and opened it without fear for the first time in decades. Caleb took his father's photograph and placed it on the mantel. Beside it, Ruth laid the cracked K9 collar Elias had left behind. Nora placed Thomas Bell's dog tag next to both of them. 2 dead men, once dismissed as unstable, reckless, and broken, finally had witnesses in the room again. Caleb stepped outside as dawn began to pale the fields. The cedar tree stood at the edge of the property, its roots torn but honest now. Ranger came to Ruth's chair, circled once, and lay down at her feet. His gray muzzle rested on his paws. His work was finished. Samuel looked around the kitchen, then at Caleb. No one had to say the farmhouse was staying in the Ward name. No one had to say the Whitakers would never again be pushed out into the cold by men hiding behind clean paper. Some promises sleep beneath soil for years. Some truths survive inside boxes, walls, maps, and the memory of a loyal dog. And when the right person finally comes home, even a buried promise can rise and speak. Thank you for listening to this story. If Samuel, Ruth, Caleb, and Ranger earned a place in your heart, leave a comment. Share this video with someone who believes loyalty still matters. And subscribe to support the channel and hear the next story.